In 1884, a young engineer walked into Thomas Edison's office. He had nothing but a letter of recommendation and a mind that would one day change the entire world. Edison hired him on the spot. For the next year, Nikola Tesla worked 20-hour days. He solved problems that Edison's entire team had failed to crack for months. He redesigned Edison's motors from scratch. The results were extraordinary. Edison himself called it a bully achievement. And when Tesla finished the job, he asked Edison for the $50,000 bonus he had been promised. Edison looked at him, smiled, and said, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." There was no money. There had never been any money. Tesla picked up his coat, walked out of the building, and never came back. That single act of arrogance launched the most vicious, most expensive, and most consequential business war in the history of technology. Before it was over, there would be dead animals, public executions, a stolen invention, a battle at the World's Fair, and one man left with nothing, while his ideas powered the entire planet. This is the story of Nikola Tesla versus Thomas Edison, and it is not the story you think you know. Let's go back to where this really starts. 1856. A small village in what is now Serbia. Nikola Tesla was born during a lightning storm. His mother looked at the midwife and said the child would be a child of darkness. The midwife looked back and said, "No, he will be a child of light." You could not write a better origin story if you tried. Tesla grew up different, obsessively different. He could memorize entire books after reading them once. He could perform complex calculus entirely in his head. He spoke 8 languages. He had photographic memory so precise that when he designed machines, he didn't build prototypes first. He ran them in his mind, for weeks, checking every component, every tolerance, every variable. When he finally built something physically, it worked the first time, every single time. He studied engineering in Austria and Czechoslovakia. He was brilliant to the point of being frightening. And he became obsessed with a single idea, a new type of electrical current. At the time, electricity was still a mostly theoretical force. A handful of engineers were racing to figure out how to harness it, transmit it, and sell it. And the biggest name in that race, by a distance, was Thomas Edison. Is one of the tupped look upright than that? Let's understand what he actually was. Thomas Edison was not just an inventor, he was a machine. He held over 1,000 patents. He built the first industrial research laboratory in the world. He was the first person to figure out how to commercialize electricity at scale, and he had done it with direct current. DC, direct current, pushes electricity in one direction at a constant, steady flow. It was real. It was tested. It was working in parts of New York City. But it had a massive problem. DC electricity lost power over distance, rapidly. So rapidly that to power a city, you couldn't use one central station. You needed a power station every single mile. The economics were brutal. The infrastructure was nearly impossible. Edison knew this. He didn't care, because he had already spent millions building the infrastructure for DC. He had investors locked in. He had a business model built on it. To admit DC had a fatal flaw was to admit his entire empire was built on sand. So he didn't admit it. He doubled down. And then, a skinny Serbian engineer with a letter in his hand walked through his door. Tesla arrived in New York in 1884 with 4 cents in his pocket. He had been robbed on the journey. His luggage was stolen. He arrived in America with almost nothing. He had one thing of value. A letter from his former employer, a man named Charles Batchelor, one of Edison's most trusted associates. The letter reportedly said, and I want you to hear this, "I know 2 great men. One is you. The other is this young man." Edison read the letter, looked Tesla up and down, and hired him. Tesla was now working for the most famous inventor in the world, at the most advanced electrical laboratory on the planet. This was the dream. And for a while, it was everything he had imagined. Tesla threw himself into the work. He was there when Edison arrived. He was there when Edison left. He worked through the night. He solved problems that had stumped the entire team. Edison noticed. And one day, he gave Tesla what seemed like an impossible assignment. Edison's DC generators were inefficient, badly inefficient. They wasted enormous amounts of energy. His engineers had been trying to fix them for months. They had gotten nowhere. Edison walked up to Tesla and said, "Fix the generators. Redesign the entire system." And then he added something else. He said there would be a $50,000 bonus if Tesla succeeded. In today's money, that's over $1.5 million. Tesla said nothing. He went to work. For the next several months, Tesla worked with a ferocity that impressed even Edison's most hardened engineers. He didn't just tinker with the generators, he rebuilt them from first principles. He designed 24 new machines. He rewrote the entire electrical system from the ground up. When he was finished, Edison's generators were running dramatically better. The improvements were real. They were measurable. They were undeniable. Tesla went to Edison and asked for his $50,000. And Edison laughed. He told Tesla he didn't understand American humor, that the bonus had been a joke, a figure of speech. There was no $50,000. There had never been any intention to pay it. Tesla stood there for a moment. Then he asked for a raise. He was making $18 a week. He asked for $25. Edison said no. Tesla picked up his things and walked out. What happened next is one of the most humiliating chapters in the history of American science. Nikola Tesla, the man who would eventually give the world alternating current, who would hold over 300 patents, who would make possible every electrical grid on Earth, spent the next year digging ditches. He had no money, no connections in America, no employer. He found work through a labor contractor, manual labor, digging ditches for Edison's own electrical cabling system in New York City. Let that land for a second. The man who was going to revolutionize electricity was physically digging holes in the ground to lay the cables of the man who had just cheated him out of $50,000. He worked in the cold. He worked in the mud. Engineers from Edison's company would walk past and look down at him. The brilliant Serbian theorist, doing manual labor with a shovel. Tesla would later say this was the most painful period of his life. Not the physical labor, the humiliation, the sense that his gifts, his years of work, his entire life's preparation had counted for nothing. But something was happening in the background. Word was getting out about Tesla, about what he had done at Edison's lab, about the AC motor design he had been developing in secret, the radical new approach to electrical current that he believed would make Edison's entire system obsolete. And one man in particular was paying very close attention. George Westinghouse was everything Edison was not. Where Edison was scrappy, self-made, and media-obsessed, Westinghouse was methodical, precise. He operated quietly. He was an industrialist of the highest order. A man who had already made a fortune inventing the railroad air brake, and he had become convinced of something that Edison was desperately trying to suppress. Alternating current, AC, was the future of electricity. Unlike DC, AC electricity could be stepped up to high voltages and transmitted over enormous distances with almost no power loss. Then, at the destination, it could be stepped back down to safe, usable levels. One power station could theoretically power an entire city, an entire region, eventually the entire country. The economics were incomparable. The infrastructure was manageable. There was just one problem. Nobody had built a working AC motor yet. Westinghouse had engineers working on it, They were stuck. And then he heard about Tesla. In 1888, Tesla gave a lecture at the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. He stood at the podium and explained, in precise mathematical detail, his design for a working AC induction motor. The room went silent. Westinghouse sent a representative to Tesla's lab the very next morning. Within weeks, George Westinghouse had bought Tesla's AC patents. $60,000 in cash, $5,000 in stock, and a royalty of $2.50 per horsepower, generated by every AC motor ever built. That last part, the royalty, would turn out to be one of the most valuable clauses in the history of business contracts. Tesla was no longer digging ditches. He was the most important electrical engineer in America. And Edison was furious. His associates later said, the quiet was the thing that scared them. Edison quiet meant Edison thinking. And Edison thinking in that particular way meant someone was about to have a very bad year. He understood immediately what had happened. Tesla had taken the one technology that could make DC irrelevant and sold it to the one man with the resources to deploy it at scale. For the first time in his career, Thomas Edison wasn't sure he could win fairly. So he decided not to fight fairly. Edison started with the press. He was extraordinarily good with journalists. He had cultivated relationships with newspapers across the country for years. He was America's inventor, America's hero, the Wizard of Menlo Park. When Edison spoke, newspapers printed it. So he started speaking. He gave interviews claiming AC electricity was too powerful to be safe, that it would kill anyone who came near it, that Westinghouse and Tesla were putting profits over human life. He wrote in one letter, and I'm quoting him directly, "Just as certain as death, Westinghouse will kill a customer within 6 months after he puts in a system of any size." He started using the word Westinghoused in public, as a verb, as in to be electrocuted, to be killed. He was trying to brand Tesla's invention with death itself. He wrote letters to city governments warning them against AC installations. He lobbied state legislatures. He funded studies designed to reach a specific conclusion. But talking wasn't enough for Edison. He needed to show people. So he started the demonstrations. Here is where this story gets genuinely disturbing. Edison began acquiring stray animals, mostly dogs and cats, and he began publicly electrocuting them with AC current, not in secret. In front of audiences, in front of journalists, with cameras present. The message was simple and visceral. This is what AC electricity does. This is what Westinghouse and Tesla want to put in your homes. The demonstrations were covered in the newspapers. People were horrified. But Edison wasn't finished. He had a bigger stage in mind. When New York State was looking for a more humane method of execution to replace hanging, Edison saw an opportunity. He secretly lobbied for the state to adopt an electric chair, specifically powered by AC current. Let me explain why this was genius-level villainy. If New York used AC electricity to execute criminals, if the word Westinghouse became slang for electrocution, then every household in America would associate Tesla's current with death, with the electric chair, with murder. Edison succeeded. New York adopted the electric chair. They first used it in 1890 on a man named William Kemmler. It did not go well. The execution was botched. It was horrific. And the newspapers covered every detail. Edison made sure of that too. George Westinghouse reportedly said afterward, they would have done better to use an axe. But the damage to public perception of AC was real. Tesla watched all of this. The smear campaign, the animal executions, the electric chair. And then Edison did something that even by his own standards was extraordinary. 1903, Luna Park, Coney Island, New York. A circus elephant named Topsy had killed 3 trainers over her life. The last one had reportedly tried to feed her a lit cigarette. The park's management decided she needed to be put down. Initially, they planned to hang her. The ASPCA objected. Hanging was inhumane. Edison's company, by this point operating under General Electric, stepped in with an offer. They would electrocute her with AC current, and they would film it. On January 4th, 1903, in front of a crowd of 1,500 people, Topsy the Elephant was fed carrots laced with cyanide, fitted with copper-lined sandals connected to AC generators, and electrocuted. She died in approximately 10 seconds. Edison's company filmed the entire thing and distributed the film widely. It was one of the earliest motion pictures commercially released in America. The message was still the same. AC electricity kills. But here's what Edison didn't understand, or didn't care about, which might be worse. The public was beginning to turn. Not against AC, against Edison. Because the scientists, the engineers, the people who actually understood electricity, had long since concluded that AC was not just viable, it was vastly superior. And watching the most famous inventor in America electrocute animals to win a business argument was starting to look less like public safety advocacy and more like desperation. Desperation was something Tesla was about to exploit on the biggest stage in the world. 1893, Chicago, the World's Columbian Exposition. The single greatest public event in American history to that point, 27 million visitors. The debut of the Ferris wheel, the introduction of Cracker Jack, Juicy Fruit, and Pabst Blue Ribbon, and the centerpiece of everything. The thing that would define the entire fair was electricity. They were going to light the entire fairground with electric light. Both Edison and Westinghouse bid for the contract. Edison bid $554,000. Westinghouse, using Tesla's AC system, bid $399,000. Edison, furious, tried to prevent Westinghouse from using his patented light bulbs. Westinghouse responded by designing an entirely new type of bulb that didn't infringe the patent. The contract went to Westinghouse. On the opening night of the World's Fair, George Westinghouse threw a switch, and 100,000 electric lights came on simultaneously across the fairground. The crowd had never seen anything like it. It was described as a vision of the future. People wept. Journalists ran out of superlatives. Tesla himself walked the fairground in his perfectly pressed suit, quietly watching the system he had designed light up the night sky. He had been told this was impossible. He had been told alternating current was a death trap. He had been told Edison had already won. 100,000 lights said otherwise. But the real victory was still coming. The World's Fair was a statement. What came next was a declaration. In 1895, the Niagara Falls Power Company was completing the most ambitious engineering project of the era. A hydroelectric generating station at Niagara Falls capable of producing more electricity than any other installation in history. The question was simple. What system would transmit it? The contract went to Westinghouse. The technology was Tesla's AC. On November 16, 1896, the switch was thrown. Electric power generated at Niagara Falls traveled 26 miles to Buffalo, New York. It was the largest single transmission of electrical power in history. Tesla stood at the falls and reportedly said nothing for a long time. As a young student in Europe, he had stared at a picture of Niagara Falls and told his friends, "One day, I will harness that." They had laughed at him. Nobody was laughing now. The war of currents was over. Tesla and Westinghouse had won, completely, decisively. Within a decade, AC power was the global standard. It is still the global standard today. Every electrical outlet in your home runs on the technology Nikola Tesla designed in his mind before he had ever met Thomas Edison. But winning the technical war and winning the personal war are two different things. And what happened next would prove that the most painful battles aren't always the ones that get the headlines. At the height of the AC victory, George Westinghouse came to Tesla with a problem. The company was in financial trouble. Rivals were circling. The costs of fighting Edison's campaign, of winning the Niagara contract, of building the infrastructure, it had nearly broken Westinghouse financially. He sat across from Tesla and explained the situation. The royalty clause. The $2.50 per horsepower that Tesla was owed on every AC motor ever built. It was a fortune. A figure growing larger every single month as AC spread across America. It was going to keep growing for decades. Westinghouse told Tesla that the company might not survive the payments. And Tesla, Nikola Tesla, the man who had been cheated out of $50,000 by Edison, who had dug ditches in the street, who had been publicly humiliated and smeared for years, took out his royalty contract and tore it up. He handed the pieces to Westinghouse and told him to consider the debt paid. He gave up what would have been, in today's money, billions of dollars. He was asked later why he had done it. He said, "Westinghouse believed in me when no one else did." With the royalties gone, Tesla's financial position was always precarious. He had grand dreams, enormous dreams. He was working on wireless power transmission. The idea that electricity could be broadcast through the air to any point on Earth, without wires. He built a tower, Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island. It was supposed to be the first node of a global wireless power and communication network. His investor was J.P. Morgan. When Morgan realized the technology, if it worked, would be essentially impossible to meter and sell, he pulled his funding. Without Morgan, Tesla couldn't finish Wardenclyffe. Other projects stalled. Other investors came and went. The brilliant mind that had designed the electrical infrastructure of the modern world found itself increasingly unable to navigate the financial world that surrounded it. Tesla grew eccentric, then more eccentric. He became obsessed with pigeons, especially one white pigeon he fed daily in Bryant Park. He developed extreme phobias. He lived alone in hotel rooms. He moved from the Waldorf Astoria to smaller hotels as his money ran out. He ended up at the Hotel New Yorker, in a small room on the 33rd floor, paying a discounted rate out of sympathy. On January 7th, 1943, a hotel maid opened the door to his room. Nikola Tesla was dead, alone. He was 86 years old. His estate was almost worthless. The man who had designed the electrical infrastructure of the modern world had died nearly broke in a hotel room feeding pigeons. Edison outlived the war of currents by decades. He died in 1931, 12 years before Tesla. He had continued inventing, continued building. He was celebrated to the end as America's greatest inventor, the Wizard of Menlo Park. When he died, President Hoover asked Americans to dim their lights in tribute. Much of the country did, including, presumably, lights powered by Tesla's AC system. Here is the truth that history has spent the last century slowly correcting. Edison was a genius, a genuine genius. His contributions to practical electrical engineering, to manufacturing, to the creation of research laboratories are real and enormous, and cannot be taken away. But he lied to Tesla. He cheated him. He ran a campaign of deliberate misinformation that included killing animals in public. He used his fame and his media connections to suppress a technology he knew was superior because it threatened his business interests. And he lost anyway. Tesla was right about everything that mattered. The AC system he designed in his mind and tested only in imagination before it worked perfectly the first time powers the entire world today. Every time you turn on a light, every time you charge your phone, every time a city comes alive at night. That's Tesla, not Edison. In 1917, Tesla was awarded the Edison Medal, the highest honor the American Institute of Electrical Engineers could bestow, named after the man who had cheated him. He accepted it because Nikola Tesla was, in the end, something Thomas Edison never quite managed to be, a man who refused to let his enemies define him. Tesla died with nothing but the truth, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that's enough. But here's what nobody tells you about Nikola Tesla. There was a man who studied his story obsessively, who read everything Tesla wrote, who visited his grave. That man's name was Elon Musk. He named his company Tesla. And the war over electrical current? It's still being fought, right now, in your driveway. But that is a story for another video.